Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel where we talk about Hungarian true crime stories, and my name is Tímea. And today's video is actually going to be a little bit different from the rest. That's because today's video is going to be about 5 true stories. 4 of them are mysterious unsolved murder cases, and one of them is a solved but very unfortunate tragic accident. I've been wanting to do a top 5 kind of video where the individual cases are just way too short to make separate videos on, so piling together in one, it makes perfect sense. And I also wanted to do a watercolor illustration video for a while now with some narration. And since these cases don't really have pictures to show anyway, why not just paint a picture at the same time? Now, I originally planned this video to just show the painting process and do a voiceover, but I accidentally videotaped 2.5 hours of painting footage in the wrong angle, so yeah, that wasn't gonna look good on a video, but I will try my best to somehow edit the footage into this video. Here is the final painting, you can see. I decided to illustrate a rose today because one of the stories tragically involves a rose bush. Regarding the illustration, I taught myself watercolor, and I know that my techniques aren't the best, and I know for sure I could improve a lot, so please be kind in the comments. And all of my supplies are going to be linked in the description box, along with any other information regarding the stories that I tell in all of my videos. Furthermore, somebody a few videos back gave me the excellent idea of including a Hungarian word of the day with each video. From now on, I will include the Hungarian word of the day at the end of each video, where I tell you what it means, how to pronounce it, and this will inevitably result in me just teaching you the Hungarian alphabet and phonetics. But I feel like Hungary and our weird-ass language needs more international representation anyway, so stay tuned until the end of the videos to learn a new Hungarian word. And finally, before we get started, I would like to give a shout out to my girl Jillian Chanel here on YouTube. She tells you a true crime story while putting on a face mask, so if you are interested in this kind of true crime presentation, or if you like my kind of style, you will surely like hers too. Now let's get started with the 5 stories. Number 5. The undecipherable message. Incomprehensible. This word was written on a police file dated back to the 30th of January 1993 regarding an unsolved triple homicide. At about 7 p.m. that day in the city of Budapest, an unknown perpetrator murdered a man called Novak Sándor, who was a copper craftsman. His 17-year-old daughter and their female neighbor, a woman called Tóth Lászlóné, who was quite literally at the wrong place at the wrong time. The murder was committed with an MGV 176 small caliber gun with a muffler, which is a Yugoslav type gun that had been administered in Hungary only once up until that point. An odd message was found on the body of Sándor. Now, I don't know if this message was written on his skin or etched into his skin, or if it was on a piece of paper that was left on his body. But this message read, "This is what those mafia leaders get who do not obey the rule of the CCCP Criminal Brigade." The definition of CCCP according to Wikipedia is the abbreviation for the full name of the Soviet Union in Russian, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Even though the police worked with full force on this investigation, they never found any connection between any of the victims and the CCCP or any known mafias. There was no obvious motive, and therefore the murderer was also never found. The police even investigated the possibility that Shandor was not the targeted victim, but that it was a murder for hire and the hitman accidentally mistook the address. But there was no further information on that either. Shandor's wife, Novak Shandorny, later did an interview with a documentarian where she said that she believed that her husband was indeed the targeted victim because Shandor used to keep a larger sum of cash at home, and after the triple homicide, this cash mysteriously disappeared. But this was never confirmed by the police. The only time that this was mentioned was in this documentary book several years later. Could have this message been just in order to throw off the police of the murderer's scent? Or was this family somehow actually involved with the mafia or with the CCCP or anybody else who would have had a motive to kill them? Was it actually a hitman who mistook the address? Or could have it been somehow the wife who just took the cash? Otherwise, how would have the killer get inside the house? I don't know, but there are just way too many questions unanswered. Number 4. Find the man. It happened on the 13th of November 1995 in the city of Balaton-Almádi, which is a city near Lake Balaton, where the deceased body of a woman called Rehák Gizella was found. She was discovered by the paper boy just a few meters from the fence of her own house, and she was covered in knife stabs. She had dozens and dozens of them. The investigators quickly figured that she was attacked in her home because there were missed knife cuts on her mattress and in her bed sheets. But she still had some energy left in her to climb out the window and crawl onto the street, where she unfortunately bled out and died very soon. She was 45 years old and she was notably beautiful and attractive. Besides, she had several love interests going on for her. So the police entertained the idea that the killer could have been somebody she turned down. They actually had a specific suspect in mind, a younger man who got to know Gizella in Germany on a job a year prior. The police arrested him and took him into custody because he gave contradictory statements and he also did not have an alibi for the time of the murder. Unfortunately, the police had to let him go because he was able to explain why he lied and gave contradicting testimonies before. It was that because he and Gizella had an affair, he was ashamed of dating an older woman, so he just had to lie about it, I guess. On the other hand, another clue was given by the neighbor of Gizella. This neighbor said that Gizella told them that she was expecting a guest the same day of her murder. But this tip also didn't lead anywhere. Eventually, the police was able to produce one more suspect, another local young man called Bújtás Viktor, and the police subjected him to a polygraph test, which came back with positive results, suggesting that Viktor knew something that only the murderer would know. Unfortunately, Viktor suffered from a fatal disease and he died before the police could have questioned him or investigated him any further. And the brutal murder of an innocent woman is still unsolved. Number 3. The death of a receptionist. It was in the morning of the 27th of July, 1990, in the city of Siófok, another big city near Lake Balaton. The cleaning lady in the hotel Napfény discovered the murdered body of a man called Sándor Tamás. He was the receptionist at the hotel who worked the afternoon or evening shift the day before. He was killed with a single gunshot, but there is no more information on that. A taxi driver later told the police that he saw a group of men running out of the front entrance of the hotel, and they were beating and punching a helpless man lying on the ground in the parking lot. and their alleged victim was screaming for his life, asking his attackers why they were doing this to him. But the taxi driver didn't step in and didn't call the police. And unfortunately, this group of men was never traced. The only possible theory that the police could come up with was that Tamás was not the targeted victim of this crime, but his colleague, another receptionist, who Tamás swapped his shifts with. And this receptionist was supposed to work that night, not Tamás. Could have been this other receptionist targeted for this murder? Why would have he been killed? What connection did this other receptionist have with the murderer or murderers? And we also don't know if this angry mob punching this innocent man in the parking lot was actually involved in this specific crime, or if that event actually even took place. We only have the testimony of one taxi driver who did not call the authorities on time. Therefore, the murder of the innocent Tamás is yet to be solved. Number 2. Fingerprints on the beer glass. Now, this case involves quite a few people, so just to clarify, let me tell you everybody who is going to be involved. Everybody is anonymous except for the victim. There is a young woman and her 4-year-old child. Then there is Katalin, who is the mother of this young woman and therefore obviously the grandmother to the 4-year-old. There is Katalin's neighbor, Katalin's ex-husband and his new girlfriend, and a possible male suspect and his ex-girlfriend. This crime took place in Budapest on the 17th of January 1990. The young woman called Katalin's, her mother's neighbor, to please check on her in her apartment, because when the young woman was trying to call her mother on the phone, only the 4-year-old child could pick up. And this child said that grandma doesn't wake up and she is lying on the floor. Obviously, this young woman became very anxious, and that's why she called the neighbor to do this little welfare check on her mother. When the neighbor entered the house, they were shocked to see the dead body of Katalin lying on the floor in the living room, in a puddle of her own blood. Authorities were called immediately, of course. And the first person that the police questioned was Katalin's ex-husband, who now lived in a different city with his new girlfriend. And he didn't have any apparent motives to kill the mother of his 2 children and the grandmother of their grandkids. Besides, his girlfriend could verify his alibi as well. And the case went cold for another 10 years. That was on the 14th of April 2000 when a man was arrested and taken into custody for drunk driving. The police took his fingerprints, which were uploaded to the central database. But it wasn't for another 5 years for his fingerprints to be actually matched on the fingerprint samples that were found on a beer glass from the crime scene of Katalin's murder. Interestingly, these suspects' scent, hair samples, and DNA did not match anything else found on the crime scene, only these fingerprints on this specific beer glass. This man claimed that he did not know Katalin and he had never been anywhere near her house either, and that he had no idea how his fingerprints ended up on the beer glass. But the police subjected him to a polygraph test, which came back with the result that this man was supposedly lying and he knew information only the murderer could have known. The police tracked down an ex-girlfriend of his who claimed that before the date of Katalin's murder, this man was never a drinker. However, after the date of the murder, he became a severe alcoholic. Not to mention that this ex-girlfriend claimed to have seen this man putting his clothes to dry on the radiator, the clothes that he was seen wearing on the day of Katalin's murder, suggesting that he washed those clothes by hand and put them on the radiator to dry faster. So, all in all, we have an inconclusive polygraph test, We do not know how this man's fingerprints ended up on this beer glass. Was it really just by accident? Did they somehow go shopping in the same grocery store and they touched the same beer glass? Or was this man actually involved in the murder of Katalin? And how would have he gotten inside her apartment? What would have been his motive? And why didn't he also kill the 4-year-old then? And if nothing else from the crime scene matched his samples, then could have he had accomplices? Either way, after 31 years, we still have no solid answers, and the killer or killers of Katalin are still on the loose. Number 1. A killer rosebush. It was in the city of Sexard on the 21st of March 1974 at around 11 p.m. when a man named Lambert Mihai was found lying on the floor unconscious in a puddle of his own blood by his daughter. Ambulance was called immediately and he was first taken to the emergency surgery unit of the hospital, and then he was later transferred to the neurology ward. He was covered in blood and there was a huge gaping hole in the middle of his forehead. So the police obviously suspected a possible attempted murder with gunshot. Unfortunately, Mihai never regained consciousness and he died 1 week later in the hospital, so he was never able to tell authorities what actually happened to him. This huge hole in the middle of his forehead was equivalent to a nail size 150, and there were other cut wounds on his head as well. But the police was baffled because they just could not find a bullet that seemingly entered his skull but never exited. However, Mihai was not the victim of a murderer. On the same day, Mihai was walking on the street and he accidentally and tragically tripped over and fell headfirst into a recently trimmed rosebush. When rose bushes are trimmed, they usually clip the ends of the branches to be pointy. And because these rose branches are extremely sturdy and hard, one of these branches acted as a sharp nail and punctured his skull 9 centimeters or 3.5 inches deep. And the cut wounds on his head were caused by the rose thorns. But this injury wasn't immediately fatal. The accident would have been apparent to anyone had Mihai stayed there, lying headfirst fallen into this rosebush. But because he didn't die right away, he collected all of his strength, stood up, and therefore the rose branch came out of his skull, leaving this accidental, morbid murder weapon behind. He was well enough to walk all the way back home to his apartment, where he later collapsed unconscious onto the floor and bled out. What a tragic and sad way to die. So there you have it, 5 very short, unsolved murder or death cases from Hungary. Let me know how you like this kind of content. Do you like these short story compilations? Did you like the watercolor illustration? Should I continue this? What should I paint next? And finally, before we go, the Hungarian word of the day is going to be rejtély. It means mystery. The Hungarian R is very rhotic, and the letter J and LY are both the sound Y. And there is no difference between these two sounds. We just differentiate between these two versions of spelling for orthographical reasons. This is A and this is E. So it's pronounced rejtély. If you have made it this far into this video, you might as well like it. Don't forget to comment something about these stories or what you would like to see next. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more from me. And thank you very much for watching this video. See you next time. Bye!